Let's talk about ADA Title II compliance when it comes to the digital experiences of public schools. The title of this presentation is ADA Title II, Digital Accessibility in Public Education, and at the bottom of the slides is accessible.org. I have two slides on objectives. The first reads, to highlight specific accessibility considerations for digital learning as places of public education work towards ADA Title II compliance. But I wanted to be even more direct. So on this next slide, I have to make sure public schools don't overlook or mess up accessibility because they are new to digital accessibility. So this presentation spans the public education sphere, which includes public schools, public universities, community colleges, public education programs, public education centers, school districts, technical schools, elementary schools, education departments, education contractors, and the list goes on. And on this next slide, I have Title II basically. So if you receive money from the government and you serve as a place of learning, you need to be compliant. So again, if you're wondering whether or not you're covered by Title II of the ADA, just think about your connection to the government if you receive government funding. All right, so on this next slide, I have my first advice, which is to get started now. Schools have a lot of digital content and usually multiple digital assets are involved, and you are already on the clock. So for Title II compliance, you either have 2 years or 3 years, and that is not a lot of time. So the first step is to take inventory of everything that's digital. Take inventory. And it's not just your learning platform. This is all of your content, all of your documents, your social media, everything that is digital. Take inventory and write it down because you likely need to make it WCAG 2.1 AA conformant. Of course, there are exceptions. I have another video on exceptions for content, and I will link to that video in the description. On this next slide, I have procurement. So following along the lines of the previous slide, everything digital that you buy must be WCAG 2.1 AA conformant. This includes platforms, tools, content, third-party integrations like apps, software, embeds, widgets, etc. Everything that you buy needs to be accessible. And now we get to several slides on learning management systems, or LMS platforms. So learning management system platforms are used often for classes. And these are, typically schools aren't using their own LMS. They're using an LMS that comes from someone else. So you need to scrutinize this LMS platform that you're using, and a VPAT/ACR is not enough. Now, this is important enough that I want to talk about VPATs and ACRs. So VPAT is the acronym for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And the terms VPAT and ACR are used interchangeably, but technically the VPAT is just an empty template, and you fill in this template to create an ACR, or an accessibility conformance report. So the technically correct term is ACR, but just know when someone says VPAT or ACR, this is what they are referring to. And really what an ACR is it's an accounting of the accessibility of what is typically a digital product. All right, so looking at the ACR, we need to make sure that the WCAG 2.1 AA standards we need to make sure that WCAG 2.1 AA is used as a standard. Now, sometimes the VPAT version will be for a standard that includes WCAG 2.1 AA, so that is okay, but we need to make sure all 50 success criteria that comprise 2.1 AA are accounted for. We also need to look at the scope of the ACR. This is very important. So the scope needs to span all of the features of the LMS. Everything that we use the LMS for, that needs to be a part of the scope, because we don't want to see simply a part of a platform being evaluated. We need to see an accounting of everything. We also need to look at what issues exist. I've talked about how an ACR is an accounting. It is only an accounting. It doesn't mean that the LMS is accessible. It just means that the LMS has been evaluated for accessibility. Also, we need to look at who issued the ACR. It is so important because we need to make sure that a reputable digital accessibility provider has issued the ACR. So we don't want to see an ACR that has been issued by the LMS platform itself. They need to have gone through an independent, reputable digital accessibility provider. So if the issuing party is an overlay widget vendor, then it doesn't count. If it's made in-house, again, it doesn't count. What is the date of issuance? So we're looking for a fresh ACR. We want to see something that's recent. If it's older than 2.5 years, that's not going to be good enough. Similarly, does it cover the latest version? So let's say the LMS version is at 2.5 and we're looking at an ACR for version 2.3. That's not good enough. We need to also ask the LMS platform: are they going to update the ACR when new updates occur? Will they resolve issues if we come across any issues? Are they going to resolve those issues? Also, as for you as a school, have you tested the platform to just check yourself to make sure that basic accessibility measures are in place? So this can include screen reader testing, this can include keyboard testing, a visual inspection. It doesn't have to be a complete audit, which is going to be a formal manual evaluation, but we do need to inspect the platform ourselves just to test and make sure if we have an ACR that says that this is fully WCAG 2.1 AA conformant. All right, let's make sure on our end that this is actually the case in fact. Also, is the use documentation accessible? So the platform may refer to its own website and possibly for instructions or information. We need to make that sure that the instructions and information are also accessible. On this next bullet point, I have: does the LMS allow content to be uploaded in an accessible manner? So it's one thing for the platform itself to be accessible, but we also need to ensure that when we are uploading content, that we are given enough access so that we can upload content accessibly. So an easy example of this is if we are uploading an image, that we can also upload alternative text that will be assigned to the alt attribute for the image. Also, is the media player accessible? So we need to look at the media player that's embedded, or the media player that we can upload a media player that is accessible. So we need to look at the media players embedded in the LMS. And then on this next slide, this next bullet point, I just have different content that we need to make sure that we can make accessible. So this would include alternative text for images, and then similarly, making sure that we can have empty alt attributes for images that are decorative, closed captions, text transcripts, and then also that we provide audio descriptions. So if we have any video, then we can have an alternative video with an audio description. So these are different things that we need to take into account. Also, the original video itself could have an audio description, but typically we're looking at an alternative video. All right, so on this next slide, continuing on with LMS platforms, because this is so important. Typically, schools are sourcing this out, so we need to make sure that we have really inspected the LMS that we are using. We need to make sure the user account settings, so this could be the student profiles. We need to make sure those pages or those screens are accessible. We need to make sure that there is a robust experience across different environments. So the LMS may not be, it's not going to be accessed from just one device or just one browser, or it may not be, different students may be using different assistive technologies to access the content. So we need to make sure there's a robust and seamless experience across all of these different environment combinations. Also, beyond just the ACR, has the LMS been user tested? And this is different from an audit. So one thing to know is that an ACR is going to result from an audit. There's no way around that. We need to have the formal manual evaluation to evaluate all of the WCAG success criteria. But user testing is different. So there's testing involved with auditing, but then there's user testing where we have one or more professionals with one or more disabilities, typically using assistive technology and going through the, in this case, the LMS, and relaying their practical experiences. Do they come across any accessibility issues? So user testing is another part of this. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is something that we would like to see from the LMS platform. Also, a big red flag. So I have a big red flag on this next slide, and then I have I have an accessibility logo or an accessibility emblem, or an emblem that has been typically associated with accessibility overlay widgets. We need to make sure that the LMS platform's website does not use an overlay widget. If it does, that is a cause for concern, because that tells you that they think that in some way an overlay widget makes their website accessible. And that is going to be a really big red flag that we need to, at that point, we need to really look beyond and just evaluate, is this LMS platform provider, are they serious about accessibility? Because when you have an overlay widget, it really says that you're not serious about accessibility. So this is a big red flag. And that's something to instantly look for before before all of the bullet points that I just went over. All right, so as a public school, video is key to learning. So we need to make sure that our video is accessible. So going over a few considerations for video, we need to make sure that we have accurate closed captions in place. And closed captions are not subtitles. So keep that in mind. Even though sometimes the terms are used interchangeably, just think of subtitles as where we can hear the audio, but we may not be able to discern what the dialogue is. With captions, we are going to include all of the meaningful audible information. So there is a difference to captions and subtitles. Basically, with subtitles, we assume that the audience can hear the can hear what is in the video, but with captions, we don't assume that. We need to make sure that there are live captions when we have a live broadcast. So for WCAG 2.1 AA conformance, if we are having live classes, then we need to make sure there are live captions. The good part, a nice part of this is that with advancements in artificial intelligence, we can have really accurate live closed captions, and we can do so through an AI caption provider. We also need to make sure that audio descriptions are available. And so what audio descriptions do is they basically describe what is visually being presented in the video that is not being relayed audibly. So let's think about a teacher writing on the whiteboard. On the sub bullet point, I have what is on the whiteboard. So the teacher may be talking through what their lesson, but they're not describing what is on the whiteboard. And we need to make sure that audio descriptions are available so that any meaningful visual information is conveyed audibly. Also, with we need to make sure that the video player itself is accessible. So again, that goes back to the embeds. When we're using a video player, we need to make sure that that video player is fully accessible. And then continuing on, there may be digital textbooks. So in this case, again, we need to make sure all of the content is accessible. So the images, the video, the audio, the text. And then we also need to make sure any interactive elements like quizzes or I don't know, there could be like questions after each lesson, etc. We need to make sure that those interactive elements are accessible. Of course, documents are a big part of this. There is going to be the remediation of documents, and I also recommend that your schools start using templates. So templates for spreadsheets, or maybe not so much spreadsheets, but templates for PDFs, templates for Word documents, templates for presentations is what I meant. Use these templates so that your teachers have all they have to do is add the content. And then, of course, there are some considerations when adding the content. But this way, the document itself will be accessible. And then it's a matter of making sure that the content is accessible. And I don't know if I explained that exactly right, but the key here is that because we need to make sure all of these documents are WCAG 2.1 AA conformant, and document accessibility is different from web accessibility, but we need to make sure that we apply the principles in WCAG 2.1 AA. And my point here is that by using templates, we can really simplify this process so that we're not creating new documents over and over again that have accessibility issues. This way, we can streamline the process and make it easier for teachers or whoever is creating these new documents. Content. So some considerations here. Have you made access to the information flexible? So by that I mean, are there alternatives to accessing the information? Does the alternative provide, and then another question here is, does the alternative provide the equivalent information? So let's say we have an image. We have this image. We need to describe it so that what the image is known programmatically. And so is that description equivalent to the image, like what is being presented on the image? So when it comes to content, you just want to make it flexible. You make it flexible by providing alternatives, but we need to make sure that those alternatives are equivalent. So if there is a large infographic and we just say infographic as our description, well, that's not an equivalent. We're not getting the equivalent information. So keep that in mind with content. And then on this next slide, I have information. Is information reliant upon a single sensory ability? So just think about, like, if we're going through a workbook and we have an audible chime that indicates we have completed a lesson. Well, we need to make sure that that audible cue or that audible information is also available programmatically. So we need to make sure that we provide a text. We can reinforce that with text that says lesson completed. It's not that there's anything wrong with the chime, but we just need to make sure that we provide another way to access what the chime is indicating. We also need to look out for color indicators. So think about a pie chart that is color coded. It's okay that the pie chart is color coded, but we need to have more information beyond just the colors that are relaying information. We need to have we can just simply add text so that someone knows, okay, this red portion of the pie chart it actually indicates X, whatever X is. So going beyond color and then providing that additional text. And then on this next slide, or not this next slide, this next bullet point, I have a visual cue. So just being aware that, if someone cannot see the visual cue, that there is another way that they are aware of what the cue is. So in this case, again, I have a check mark. So let's say we have a completed lesson and we get a check mark. We need to make sure that same information is available programmatically. And then so this next slide, I actually have an example of a toggle button, and where the toggle is merely conveying whether it's on or off with color. So we have this green button, and it is green because it is activated. But if someone is unable to perceive this color, then it's going to be difficult to know if the button is activated. And so that the way that we make this accessible is that we provide we provide the letters on, so that if someone is, let's say they are colorblind, so they are unable to perceive the difference in color. Now we have this additional text that indicates, okay, yes, the button is toggled on. Although I will say that in this case, the color contrast may fall below the 3-to-1 color contrast ratio for large text, but that really is besides the point. All right, so on this next slide, I have menus and options. So we are concerned with WCAG 2.1 AA conformance. We are not concerned with accessibility menus and options. These can be a bonus, maybe. So I say maybe, but this is not what accessibility is. This is more like, think of this as like maybe a bonus add-on. So on this slide, I have a button that shows dark mode is on. I also have a toggle or a switch between plus and minus buttons to really demonstrate that sometimes you will see a website or some software with plus minus buttons meant to indicate that we can zoom in or zoom out. With this is a possible red flag, because this isn't accessibility. We need to make the code and the content itself accessible. We don't need to add on accessibility. And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with having these options, but these are things that can be provided by browser extensions. So this really isn't making a website accessible. It's more like adding, as I said, it's more like an add-on. So we want to make sure that we are WCAG 2.1 AA conformant. We are not so much concerned with accessibility menus and options. So if they're in addition to WCAG 2.1 AA conformance, that can be okay. But again, our focus is on 2.1 AA and nothing that's an add-on or a tack-on or a plugin to a website. On this next slide, I have teachers and instructors, and that is because we need to make sure that all teachers and instructors have training so that they are creating accessible content. So I give the example of PowerPoint distribution. We have a PowerPoint slideshow, and then it is just distributed to clients, but we need to make sure that the PowerPoint itself has been made accessible. We also need more accessible instructions, and this just comes through awareness. So when the teachers or instructors are more aware of WCAG 2.1 AA, they can provide better instructions, they can be more accurate, and they can be more descriptive. And then also, potentially, if instructors are, let's say they are adding content to web pages, then they know to use semantics. So instead of just providing the visual information, we provide semantics so that the visual information being relayed is also available programmatically. So I'll give you the example of, let's say that we have a page, and on the top of the page, we have big font, it's in bold, and it's 50 point. This is meant to indicate that we have the heading of a page or the title, the main title of the main article in place. But we need to make sure that semantics are used, because if we just have that big text, that's only going to be relayed visually. It's not going to be available programmatically. All that will happen programmatically is that if we are using a screen reader, it's just going to read that as regular text. So we will have no cue that this is the main subject of the page or the main article of the page, etc., or the main topic of the page. So we use semantics, and in this case, we would be using a heading 1 to indicate that this is a heading 1. This is the main topic of the page. So we can go on about semantics, but here we're looking to provide meaning programmatically versus only visually, typically. All right, so on this next slide, I have WCAG 2.1 AA training. Everyone needs to take this training. This means everyone. This means principals, superintendents, counselors, the school board, presidents, deans, chairs, etc. This is because nobody can be above accessibility. And in part, this is because we need to have all of these different people aware of how important accessibility is and how much is involved in accessibility and the effort that needs to be made to the effort that needs to go into ensuring accessibility. So it's going to make it difficult to procure let's say an LMS or change an LMS if we don't have all of these different people who are aware of what goes into accessibility. Or they might say, well, it's just a few accessibility issues. They've done really good, and that's okay. No, for compliance, we know that we need to get to WCAG 2.1 AA conformance. Yes, there can be some minor instances of non-conformance, but generally we're not. That's not what we're thinking as an accessibility committee or the people in charge of accessibility and accessibility coordinator. We need to ensure that everything is WCAG 2.1 AA conformant. So we don't need any of these people. So deans, chairs, principals, etc. We need all of these people to understand the importance of accessibility and all of the considerations that go into accessibility. So this is why I say that everyone needs to be trained. Also, because we need to we need to have accessibility integrated in every facet of our school operations. And in part, this is because these different people are creating content, and if they are not using accessibility best practices, it's going to affect everyone else, because sometimes accessibility won't matter. So let's say we're writing an email and we're not thinking about accessibility, and we don't know who, like, let's say we have a principal who is writing a letter to all of the students. Well, the principal didn't take training, they don't know about accessibility best practices, and they have their email isn't accessible. So this is where it's so important that we get all of these people on the same page. We also need them on the same page for budgetary reasons. We need to make sure that they are providing enough money. We need to make sure that precedent is being set, that we're not going to make exceptions, or we're only going to use accessibility or involve accessibility when it's convenient. We have to make sure that everybody is establishing processes to ensure that content is accessible, especially given that this is a learning environment. So we need everyone to take WCAG 2.1 AA training. And by the way, this doesn't have to be long. This doesn't even have to be a full day. But when everybody starts to understand what goes in to the web content accessibility guidelines, then they become so much better for it. And it's also, as you start to make all of your digital assets and all of your content WCAG 2.1 AA conformant, what you will notice is that it improves usability of your different digital experiences. And I think in some cases, especially with some success criteria, it's going to improve learning, because it really reinforces the information and provides different ways of accessing the information. And then also you have teachers and instructors who are making additional considerations, and they're putting thought into making sure that this content is accessible, and they're looking at how descriptive they are. They're looking at the precision of their instructions, etc. So if WCAG 2.1 AA permeates all of the content that's created, all of the communications, it is going to greatly affect your school in a very positive way. Okay. So in this next slide, I have we're changing how things are done. And so this gets back into the previous slide. Keep this in mind for your budget, for your processes, for your operations, and for your vendor selection. We are changing how things are being done for the better. I guarantee you, at the end of this process, your school will be better off for working and integrating accessibility. There is some work to be done, and that's partly why I'm making this presentation, is because it needs to be done in an expedited manner. You only have 2 or 3 years, but you need all of these different people to embrace accessibility, because the way the content is being created, the way the different platforms that we're using, the different digital tools that we're using, our digital assets, we are changing the way things are done. Our processes are changing. We need to reflect this in our budget. But the good news about this is you're going to see a spike in your budget for the next, let's say, 1 to 2 to 3 years, but this is gradually going to go down. And in part, it's going to go down because your staff, your contractors, your employees are going to become more and more proficient in accessibility. And then eventually, and especially this will be the case with some of the digital team, they're going to become mini experts themselves in accessibility. And so more and more accessibility is going to come in-house, and you're going to be able to integrate accessibility seamlessly into your processes. And so we're not going to be mired in this disjointed process where we start creating content, and then after the fact we make it accessible. No, we will make content accessible as a result of our processes. On this last page, we are done. I have resources. So one resource is my WCAG course. This is available at wcagcourse.com. I will include a link to this course in the description. This is going to train everybody on WCAG 2.1 AA. And then the other resource I have is the ADA Title II Resource Center at accessible.org. So if you go to accessible.org/ADA-title-II, you will find my ADA Title II Resource Center. And that is where I am really collecting all of my resources that I'm publishing and putting them on this one page. So it's easy to find all of these different resources that I've been creating throughout the last really month or so. So I will include links to both of these resources in the description. And that's it for this video.